Hello, my name's Angela Tinney, and I'm here with my colleague Christy Scott today. We are learning designers from UWS, and today we're going to talk about a toolkit that we're using to respond to the challenges of returning to on-campus teaching and learning. We feel that if we can address the challenges that staff have in returning to on-campus teaching and in using the spaces we have at UWS, that this is going to help to kind of set expectations for students and will obviously benefit them in the long run. So what we'll run through is just why now, a bit of history and context, a wee bit about how the toolkit has developed, and then just what the future plans for the toolkit are. So why now? In May of this year, our new principal, who came in towards the end of last year, introduced some new learning and teaching principles for the university, which essentially mandated a return to synchronous delivery on campus. So unless a module was specifically designed for online delivery and approved for that, then the focus was to try and bring people back on campus. So before this, UWS was essentially using a hybrid approach. So since COVID, we're the kind of pivot to online, and then afterwards we've been using a kind of hybrid approach. So we have some programs that students and staff maybe weren't fully back on campus yet, and some who maybe hadn't been on campus at all. So these new principles stated that on-campus learning events were to focus on providing active and interactive learning opportunities for students, and these would be supported by asynchronous activities and resources on our VLE for pre-learning and kind of consolidation of learning afterwards. And this is quite a move away from that hybrid approach that we'd been using back to a more blended delivery, which is familiar for some of the staff who've been working at the institution pre-COVID, but it's obviously very different from the students who have been at the university since then. So say a student had joined the institution in 2020, they'll have studied with that hybrid approach, for their entire degree programme up until this point, where we're now asking them to come back onto campus. But also in the last few years, we've had some changes on our campuses, refreshing the spaces that we have on campuses, but we've also had two new campuses open. So our London campus last year in 2022, and our Dumfries campus earlier this year in kind of April, May 2023. And these have been designed to kind of follow in a similar pattern work that was done on our Lanarkshire campus. Another reason is just that support for learning spaces, just through restructuring of departments within the university, work that hadn't really been taking place for a while. We are now looking as a team to try and kind of refocus some of that support on the learning spaces and how staff are using them. Because what we find after the new principles were released, that some staff maybe haven't been on campus teaching face-to-face since COVID. And so the skill set required for that, some people were out of practice and they just needed a bit of a refresher because they've been using different kinds of skills while teaching online. But also we have some new staff to the organisation who maybe have never taught face-to-face or haven't taught face-to-face in the types of spaces that we have at UWS. So really it's just to try and get everybody's confidence up in using the spaces that we have. So just a wee bit about the history and context. As I said, like any kind of refreshing work and new campus approach that we take is based off of work that happened at our Lanarkshire campus. So our Lanarkshire campus opened in August of 2018, but surrounding that campus, new campus build, there was the Lanarkshire campus project. And so the new campus kind of moved away from the traditional kind of lecture spaces and classrooms that we had in our previous Hamilton campus. And the new campus had more flexible, open, collaborative kind of learning and teaching spaces. So they were quite different to what our staff were used to. So Dr. Gordon Heggie was the academic lead for that project, and he helped to design the spaces that would encourage kind of student-centred active learning events, so that staff would be doing those kind of events while in those spaces. And as I say, this was quite different to the to what staff had been used to. So for example, in the new campus, there's only one lecture theatre, so a Harvard-style lecture theatre. We do have an auditorium that seats around 200 people, but it was very a kind of intentional decision not to have lecture spaces on the campus. So most of the other spaces are open and flexible and can be used in a variety of ways. There's also some specialised areas and our nursing simulation suites and science labs, things like that. But another new concept on the campus was this idea of whole campus learning. So the idea that any space could be a learning space, and just trying to frame that and get staff to start thinking about that was then how they could use those spaces was just a bit of work that needed to be done. So while the campus was still being built, so preparations in terms of that move were starting to take place, and it was decided that they would run workshops for staff to try and get them to prepare for this move to move into the new campus, which was difficult because these spaces didn't exist in the old campus. So it was just about how would you get staff to kind of start to kind of think about those spaces. So a toolkit was developed to use in these workshops, and the idea was to kind of help staff to learn about the spaces, have a think about the spaces, and then start to conceptualise how they might start to use it in their teaching, but without actually being in the spaces or seeing them live. And another thing just to point out is like one of the kind of big visions for the new campus was this idea of like really getting staff to think about pedagogy first, and then the space and the technology. They didn't want the space to be driving the teaching that was going to happen in there. So the focus on the workshop was to try to get staff to think about the learning events that they would be delivering, and then how they would then kind of identify spaces that would work in. And then this would tie in with kind of timetabling, so they would be able to request the types of spaces that would fit the learning events that they would be delivering. So this is quite a different way of working for staff, and the workshop had to kind of try and address those different elements. So the Lanarkshire Learning Landscapes Toolkit was developed for these workshops, and this toolkit was developed by our colleague Claire Mackey, and it was adapted from the Viewpoints project, which was a JISC-funded project developed by Ulster University, where they developed and used these viewpoint cards as a reflective tool in curriculum design. And just a really quick overview of viewpoints, if people aren't aware, is just each card will have a concept or a principle on it with a short description, and then on the reverse of the card there's a list of suggestions or examples of how that could be implemented, or how that could be achieved. Really the cards are kind of designed as a prompt for discussion, within a kind of workshop idea. So just to get staff discussing and reflecting on that particular concept. And another example of something that's been developed from Viewpoints that people might be aware of is the ABC learning design approach. So it's a very kind of similar idea to that. And so as part of the Lanarkshire campus project, a guide was created, and hopefully on the right hand side you can see that, where there was a kind of a page for each room. So it would have what the space was called, the capacity of the space, kind of suggestions for learning events that would be suitable in that space, a bit about the furniture, whether it was movable or static, and just a wee bit about the technology that staff could expect in that space. And so what our colleague Claire essentially did was took the design of the viewpoint cards and the information from this guide and put them together. So down at the bottom of the slides, you can see that there's a card for each of the learning spaces with a bit of a description on it. And then on the other side of the card, there's a small bit of information just about the furniture and the technology. But then there's like a list of examples of either types of learning, activities or suggestions for learning activities that you could do in that space. And then there was a bit of space at the bottom that staff could kind of add in any other things that came out of their discussion. And again, it was like the cards were intended as a discussion prompt to get staff to reflect on the types of learning events that they'll be able to deliver in each space, but also to share ideas with each other, you know, to try and kind of stimulate that discussion. So whether that was people coming in a program team, or you know, if people just signed up for a workshop and they were getting to kind of work across different departments or disciplines within the university. And these discussions were quite successful in helping staff to think about the different spaces and actually prepare for moving to the new campus. But what I'll do now is I'll pass you over to Christy, because what she's now done is kind of taken this to the next step. So I'll pass to you, Christy.
Thank you. So I joined the university in May and took this project on as the first kind of project that I got stuck into. So to develop the new refreshed version of the toolkit, we started out with gathering all that existing information. So we've got that toolkit that existed for Lanarkshire, and then had to find out more about the other 3 campuses, so Paisley, Dumfries and London. And consulted with IT to get information that they had about the different technology in the different types of rooms and estates, to try and get floor plans and any photos that they had of different spaces on different campuses. And the idea being that we're now making a toolkit that would be applicable across all 4 campuses, not just sort of campus specific. I had the opportunity to visit all the different space types. So particularly focused on Lanarkshire, that being the model that that UWS have kind of used to replicate and create the new campus buildings in Dumfries and in London, and also having a look and explore around Paisley as another big campus that has quite a mixture of some of the refreshed spaces, but also quite a lot of the older legacy spaces, so still some kind of lecture halls and some classrooms there. Just to get a real feel for the types of spaces that staff come across in their kind of day-to-day work, and what's realistic, I guess. It did a needs analysis that was quite informal and based predominantly on the kind of feedback that we were already getting in other design work that the team were getting involved in. Any kind of conversations that we had some specific requests from teams that were looking for support on this, in particular from the Dumfries campus, from the lecturers that had moved into the new building, and also things that were picked up as feedback through the PGCAP module that or program, sorry, that our team run, and the students on that, and what kind of feedback they were giving. So all of that kind of informed the design and the development of the new toolkit. And at the beginning, we had this kind of idea that the approach would be that, as I say, it would be a toolkit that would be applicable across all campuses now, that it would build on what was produced for Lanarkshire, because that had worked really well. So take our colleague Claire's work, and there would be a facilitated discussion-based workshop, again, encouraging sharing of good practice, and also kind of discussing of ideas specific to kind of modules and programs and how people are using the spaces, but also that we needed a guide, and that really detailed guide that they had for Lanarkshire was excellent, but it wasn't realistic in the time frame that we had to produce anything that with that level of detail. So just producing a guide that would give staff an idea of what to expect in the different learning space types, particularly new staff or staff who hadn't been on campus for a while, because the workshop is like a half-day commitment. It's 3 hours. So we wanted that to sort of the guide to support the workshop, but also to be available as a kind of quick dip in for any staff who needed that content quite quickly. So the next slide gives a kind of overview of what the new toolkit looks like. So as I say, it's got a guide, which is in the region of about 90 pages, because it's got lots of photographs. So there's lots of pictures of the space types in different, or examples of them in different campuses. And through developing that and looking at the information that we had from the Lanarkshire project, we also kind of worked together to kind of distill that information and maybe streamline the categories of learning space from the previous one. So in the top right is the new version of the toolkit cards, and you'll see there's less cards there. So that's the sort of new streamlined version of the categories of spaces. And the idea behind that was to make it a little bit more kind of intuitive and easier to point out the difference between different space types. And rather than have that sort of high-tech, low-tech kind of approach, just have the space and then the kind of different types of equipment that may or may not be in the room. So, for example, the difference between the lecture spaces and the learning studios, the lecture spaces have some element of fixed furniture. So it could be benches or chairs that are fixed in rows generally. And the learning studios have got the movable furniture, so they can be kind of reconfigured based on what the event that you want to run in the space. So it just makes it a bit easier for academics to kind of identify the different types of spaces that they're going to come across and the kinds of events that might be suitable to run in each one. It makes it easier as well to transfer across campuses, especially with some spaces having been refreshed before the Lanarkshire project happened. So the bottom left-hand corner shows the presentation, which for the workshop. So I've developed kind of a master presentation approach that we can tailor then to run the workshop on a particular campus. So that presentation is kind of like our template, and then within that there are photos with an example of each space on each campus. And then when an event is booked, we can then tailor it to that site. So for example, with the pilot version that we ran last week in Dumfries, went through that and took out all the other site examples and just left in the photographs of Dumfries or architect's impressions where I didn't have photographs. And what that does is it really helps it to kind of transfer back into the workplace if the photographs and the spaces are familiar to the staff who are taking part in the workshop. It helps them to visualize the kind of room and how they might use the room, and they hopefully will have been in it or in a room of a similar kind of type. So just to help it make a lot more sense, and also to take out any space types that don't exist. So for example, Dumfries doesn't have any lecture spaces, so we could take that whole category out. On the bottom right hand side is just showing you the start of the facilitator guide. So I've written quite a detailed facilitator guide, so that the idea being that anyone in our team can pick up that workshop and run it, and that a sort of similar structure and content will happen. The delivery style obviously will change with the person who's delivering it and the campus that it's on, but it just has that sort of standardized format. And we'll talk in a minute about how then that will sort of facilitate us to use that going forward, that schools might be able to run the workshop themselves. And through all of that work, we've also drafted an evaluation plan that will consider the event, and we're going to use that for other events as well. So on the next slide, it talks about what our future plans are. So as I say, we're piloting this approach just now with a new refreshed kind of toolkit and workshop. We started that with the adult nursing team that teach across 3 different campuses, or there are different teams teaching in 3 different campuses. And we went down and ran it with the team in Dumfries, and we've got evaluation feedback from that, which we'll then use to improve and kind of tweak the materials before running it again for the teams that work in Paisley and in Lanarkshire on the same programme. So doing that and being able to evaluate and sort of refine it after each delivery will hopefully get us to a point where we've got a kind of product that should work in most contexts and most scenarios. We have a new role at the University of Associate Dean of Learning and Teaching, and they've all been appointed but not all started yet. So in the new year, we were hoping to engage with them as a wider department to kind of build relationships, but also particularly to promote this bit of work to the schools, and potentially they might be the people who then take the materials and run it within their schools, or they might nominate someone within kind of program teams or divisions that might be good to run these facilitative workshops within kind of school events. We recognise as well that there is kind of like a time scarcity for academics, and that this sort of half-day workshop might not be possible for everyone kind of straight off, and some staff, particularly new staff, will need information quite quickly. So we're developing kind of shorter webinars that just introduce the topics and include less of the kind of discussion, just sort of introduce those prompts for people to take away and work on themselves. So those will be coming in, and it will help to promote the workshops, the longer workshops that actually get the staff sort of thinking about their own programs. And we've got a number of connected spin-offs that we want, that we've got in the pipeline, and the facilitating active learning one is already drafted because it was requested in the adult nursing team. So we've kind of drafted and piloted that one as well. And then the two others that we've had kind of informal requests for, the meta skills, so building meta skills through the activities that are run in the kind of module teaching, and that will be complementary, kind of work alongside our Aspire program that develops meta skills as well. So we'll kind of take input from that and kind of help to feed back and forth. And then developing opportunities for delivering formative feedback, or opportunities to generate formative feedback through the activities that are running on campus learning, so that the focus isn't all on the kind of final assessment, that there is a focus on the process and getting feedback throughout the process. I've taken an involvement in the corporate landlord group across UWS, so that means that we get to be informed of and to inform any changes in the estate going forward, and that will be both on an operational kind of basis and strategically kind of thinking about how refreshes and reviews happen in the future. And as that happens, and as spaces change or change use, we'll be able to update the guide and the workshop as the campuses themselves evolve, so that it's kind of always hopefully keeping up to date with where we are as an institution. So our last slide just gives you a wee summary of the content of our presentation, and then we will take questions if anyone has any.